Okay, so we start with the dynamic between two equilibrium using the model of demand and supply. So okay, so we have P and Q of a good, and then we start with demand. Okay, let's call it D1, and then supply curve. Okay, S. Then we have the equilibrium at this point. Let's call it E1. Okay, so we have the equilibrium price at P1, and then the equilibrium quantity sold in the market at Q1. Okay, so let's assume the question is always going to be something happened, and then you have to judge whether you're going to change the supply or demand. So let's assume that for simplicity, income increase. So income in the whole economy increase. Okay. What's gonna happening to this model of demand and supply? So when income increased, right, it can affect demand, not the supply, because we imagine supply to be the producers, the firm or factory. So it will increase is, for example, like some technology change, or so if you have improving technology, supply shift, or maybe there's some shock in the market, that, like for example, like oil price increases. So if all the factory using oil, so it means that the material is going to be more expensive, and the production will be more expensive, so the supply curve is left. But here in this example, income increase. So maybe like the economy is good, become boom, stock market is boom, so the income of people increase. So obviously income is not price or quantity, right? It's not variable in the model. So whenever variable not in the model change, something have to shift. In this case, demand. Okay, I think it's logical to say is that if you have more income and the good is normal good, you have to look for a definition of normal good and inferior good. For normal good, the income increase means that people would like more of that goods. Right? So it means that at the same price, people want more of them. So the demand curve, right, will shift to right. Okay, so D2. Okay, so you can like go straight and go to like at the end that the new equilibrium will be like, because we don't no longer have D1, right now it's D2. So the new equilibrium will be at between D2 and S, the oil supply curve. So let's call it E2. Okay, so you can just say, okay, now the equilibrium is moving to E2, and that's it. That's the end of the story. I mean, that's correct, but then when they're testing you, they would like you to explain more what is happening. Okay, what can we do to explain? in this graph, in this model of demand and supply. Okay. So if you're going to do like bachelor degree in economics, the model will be more difficult. It will no longer be graph, right? It will be mathematics, but we stick with the graph now. Okay, so maybe let's explore first question, right? Is it correct to move demand to the left or to the right? Sorry. Okay, we can check by saying, okay, we want to represent people have higher demand of this year because of the income has increased. So does D2 show that? You can see that if we stick with P1, right, at the same price, and you draw the intersection between the old price, the old equilibrium price, P1, to the new demand curve, D2. Okay, so you have, let's say, point A here. Okay, so you can see that at point A, right, it's gonna intersect with like okay, let's say Q2. So this means that if nothing changed, right, if the price remain the same and demand of people increase, people will want now Q2, not Q1 at this price. Okay, so that makes sense, right? Because we said that income increase, when income increase, demand increases, mean that if it at the same price, people will want more of that good. That is the definition of an increase in demand. People want more of it. Okay, so that is the dynamic of how these events unfold. At first, price will stay the same at P1, right? And you can see that at P1 with the new demand, there will be higher demand. But what about supply? We still have the same supply curve, right? So you can see at P1, the supply is still at the same at Q1. Because for the producer, assume that producer is not consumer, right? The producer, okay, also the demand increase, but we don't see any. Let me. Off that. Okay, so the demand increase, but the factory is still the same factory, right? So at the price of P1, the supply that the factory would like to supply is still at Q1. So now we have the situation that okay, let me okay, another color. Okay, so we have the situation where at P1 the demand at D2 is actually more than supply. Okay, so that this is different between the two. I draw here, but you can draw here as well, right? The difference between Q2 and Q1 is different between demand and supply. Here, demand is higher than the supply. So you can say that this amount is excess supply. Okay. So what happens when you have excess supply, right? Imagine in the market, higher demand, but the amount of good produced is still the same. They're high. People want more, but we still have so little. So there will be a negotiation between consumers and producers because it's a perfect competitive market. So what happened is that obviously because you have so little of your goods, so you will increase the price. Okay. So when you increase the price, what will happen? Okay. So again, now we're talking about, okay, we start with increase of income, right? And then we have excess. Okay, I think I don't have enough sleep. Okay, not excess supply, excess demand. Okay. 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 So we have excess demand, right? So what's going to happen is that there will be negotiation of price, right? The producer, the firm would like to increase in price. So you now see that we start with income, but now we go back to price, and the price is a variable in the model. So when price change, you have to move along the curve. Okay. So what's going to happen? So on the supply curve, right? So what's going to happen is that this on the supply curve, you start with P1, right? So the price will increase. So when the price increase in a supply curve, the supply will increase. The quantity supplied by the producer will increase because they want when higher price, you want to increase the production of your good. So it's going to move that. Okay. What about demand side, right? On demand side, we on point A. So what happened is that we move along the curve of demand from A, because now price increase, the quantity demanded will reduce. Okay, so supply increase, demand reduce. So eventually you can arrive to the point of E2, the new equilibrium. So this is when again supply and demand is the same. Okay, so at this point, okay, let's call it Q3, and because we have Q3, so we have P3 as well. Okay, at this point, the whole economy or the whole market of this good going to be arriving at the new equilibrium E2 with the new equilibrium price P3 and Q3. Okay, so now you see the dynamic of how prices and the quantity change when you move from the old equilibrium to a new equilibrium. Okay, so now in terms of exercise, you can try to draw a graph like this, right? You can come up with a situation, for example, like the price of complementary good reduce, what's going to happen, right? Demand or supply, right? And as I say, so the new technology, right? Assume that now there's new technology in the factory, so it can produce with the same amount of raw materials, it can produce more goods. So that's supply going to shift. So you can try to shift the supply and to the equilibrium. Okay, I hope that this helped you to understand like basic things, how we move from the old to the new equilibrium. Okay. So the next point I would like to talk, I think it should be confusing because suddenly we move from demand and well, we still with demand and supply, but we move from price and quantity to like the marginal benefit and the marginal cost, and then we try to explain the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and this sort of thing. Okay, so how we can get our head around that? So it's the same. It's like you have a coin, right? Then you can look at one side, you see the head side, and if you look the other side, you can see the tail side, but still the same coin. This is the same. It's still the same demand and supply curve, but we look in a different way. Okay, now we look as let's assume that as a government. Okay, so So again, that's P and Q, and let's have demand D, and then we have supply S, and then we have the equilibrium at this point. E with Q1, sorry, and P1. Okay, so it's the same thing, same demand and supply, but now we look in a different way. We look in terms of welfare, right? Welfare. We think. Okay, let's assume that we are the government, okay, and we would like to improve the welfare of people in the society. By people, we mean one side are consumers, one side are producers. Okay, so I should draw to the end. Yeah. Okay. So, so in welfare, right? If we talk about welfare of the society. Okay. So now we look like okay, what is the benefit to the society? Obviously, you're producing good, right? And what is the cost of the society? Obviously, you have to use the raw material in order to produce a good, right? So that is a cost. You have to hire people, you have to buy stuff in order to produce a good. So supply will be seen from the government point of view as a cost, and the good, like the good produced, will be seen as a benefit to the society. Okay, and how can we measure the benefit that people want? Okay, so let's focus on the supply, on the demand first. Okay, so obviously the graph start at 0, right? So that's 0 on both sides, Q and P. So if you produce just one good, okay, one here, okay? So you can see that when we produce at one good, the price is very high according to the demand. Okay, the price will be that high. Let's call it P. Okay, I don't want to use P1 again, but P like, okay, raised to the power of 1. Okay, not the bottom, not the subscribe, but subscribe. Okay. So the P, that P for that one good is to be very high. Okay, so if people willing to pay that much for just one piece of good, it means that represent your willingness to pay, and if you're gonna pay, it means that it have to give you some happiness, right? Or we call in economics utility. But for the sake of simplicity, just call it happiness. So you, in order for you to depart with your money, right? You give money away for that good. It means that the happiness, it must earn your happiness higher than that amount of money. So how much is the happiness is represented by the price that you want to pay. So good number 1, right? It's just one piece of good. It's very high. What about good number 2? Good number 2 would be something like this. Okay, I draw the goods quite far away from one another, but imagine that I can draw it like very close to one another. Okay, so again, that is P2. Okay, so again, it's still high, but still lower. So the price for the second good still is high, but not that high. Okay, that represent like the concept of the marginal utility, that the more you eat of one good, the less marginal utility you have, or the less additional happiness you have, right? Imagine like if you can uh, quantify your happiness, right? You eat a bowl of noodle, and then let's say like the happiness is 10 units, and then you eat the second bowl. Well, it's still good, but might not give you an additional happiness as much as the first one. So it could be 9. The third one could be 10, right? Oh, sorry, it could be 8. Keep reducing. So that's why we call it the marginal utility, or the marginal happiness, like additional. The last unit of good, how much it gives you happiness, level of happiness. Usually it keep lower and lower and lower and lower. If you eat too much of something, eventually you might get a negative utility, or this utility, or like unhappiness, because it's too many of the good, right? So we imagine that as we go along the demand curve, right? So that represent the marginal happiness that you have going to be lower and lower and lower, and we call that marginal happiness as marginal benefit. So we keep give different name to the same thing, but you have to understand that in the development of economic theory, we start with, like, for example, maybe utility, and then for this sort of like welfare, it can be a separate branch of economics. In order to make it easy, they call it benefit. So the book have to keep using the term used in the field. So sometimes like it keeping you a new vocabulary for the same thing. But the concept is the same. The more you eat, right, the additional benefit or additional utility or additional happiness you have. So it keep reducing and reducing and reducing. So we will imagine that so this, we try to measure the happiness of people, right? So it reducing, but it's still positive. Okay, so you have 3, 4, and the price we would like to offer is still become lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. Okay, so let's say that we move until we get to Q1. Okay, so here you can see that if I draw the quantity like closer and closer and closer, or you can imagine that I can have like 1.5 unit of the good, right? Not just 1, 2, but 1.5, 1.75. So the whole thing, the area under the curve of the demand curve, this would be the happiness, the total happiness that the consumer have. Okay, right? Because you're willing to pay for the good each unit. So that means that you're happy, and that this area, right, represent the happiness of people. But how much you pay? Because if the market produced at Q1, the price is at P subscribe 1. So you don't pay P subscribe 1 or 2, right? You pay just P subscribe 1. So basically you pay here. Okay, how much you pay? So if you pay P1 per unit of good, right, and you have Q1 unit, so the total, or the payment that everybody have to pay is just P1 times Q1, or is the area of this rectangle. Okay, so you can see that instead of paying like this P superscribe 1, you say that P subscribe 1, you actually pay lower. So the difference between what you willing to pay and what you actually pay is a surplus. So that's why in terms of consumer, this area of triangle represent a surplus because it represents that the whole under the curve area represent willingness to pay, but you actually pay less than that. So it become a surplus. So that's good. Okay. So if you follow, actually we don't have to stop at Q1, but we can go we can talk about it like the whole under the demand curve, but we stop at Q1 because that is actually the amount of good that is produced. Okay, and later on we can go and tell like why. Okay. Okay, so I'll deleting that. I'll go back in time to when we have only just. Okay, maybe I can go so far as that. Okay, so I'll delete. Okay, so let's delete the concept of consumer surplus. Okay, we go back to the demand and supply, and then let's talk about producer surplus. Okay. Okay, so for the producers, right? So now we talk about what is the cost in the society, like including consumer and producer, in order to produce a good. Okay, so if you want to produce just one unit, okay, if you want to produce just one unit, okay, for the producer, that is the price you want to have. Okay, I'm gonna call it again P superscribe 1. Okay, so for the producer, if it gonna produce one unit of good, that is the price the producer would like to have. But obviously, in order for the producer to ask for the price, it means that the producer need like at least it have to be equal to the cost of the producer. Right? You don't want to sell something lower than the cost that you have to spend to produce a good. So in economics, we call like normal profit is zero, right? In normal, like profit is zero. So here, let's assume that the price that the producer wanted actually at the cost. So you don't make any profit, but you don't lose anything either. Right? So P1 is the cost of producing. As you can see that P1, right? As we move along, right, 2 unit, we have P2, and we can move along the curve, under the curve of the supply. So we have the same story. Okay. So the area, the triangle, it's not exactly triangle, right? Because it's, this is not, right? But this area represents the cost. So up until Q1, that the producer have to spend in order to produce a good. So you can see that everything, like again, it's like marginal benefit or marginal happiness or marginal utility. This is the marginal cost. So each additional cost for each unit produced. But each unit have higher cost according to this model, right? The unit number 2 have higher cost than unit number 1, right? So the marginal cost increasing and increasing and increasing. So eventually, we arrive to Q1. So now, But actually, when the producer sold the good, right, it sells at P1, not like not at this price or this price, but at this P subscribe one. So actually it have higher than the cost, right? So how high for one, right? It actually I use green to represent the difference between what the consumer pay and the producer got to the cost that the producer actually using it, right? So you can see that if I keep highlight this, I get this the green triangle, and this is the producer surplus. What actually it has higher than the cost that they use to produce the good. Okay, so that is the concept of producer surplus. Okay, so now you see the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and you see that like in total we talk about benefit and the cost of the society. Okay, so at point E, another word to describe point E is that when the marginal cost of Q1, right? At Q1, the marginal cost is this high, and the marginal benefit is the same height. So this is when at Q1, MB is equal to MC. Okay. So the total marginal benefit, right? It's okay. Let me highlight this. Okay, so now we have three color: the red, the green, the red area is here, right? And the green area is that, and then the blue area. Okay, so the total benefit is the red area plus the green area plus blue area. So that is total benefit. Because we said that the benefit to the society is measured by how people willing to pay. And up until Q1, the amount that people willingness to pay is represented by the area of red, green, and blue total together. That is the total benefit to the society. What about the total cost? The total cost is just blue. It's just a blue area. So this blue area is, oh, sorry. The blue area is also the total cost to the society in order to produce. So you can see that in terms of welfare, right? The total cost, the total benefit minus total cost is just the red area plus the green area. And you know that the green is producer surplus and the red area is consumer surplus. So actually at Q1, right, in terms of the whole society, we have positive benefit. And the positive benefit can split into two: consumer surplus and producer surplus. Because this is the area that higher than the cost that the society have to make. Okay. Why don't we produce more than Q1? Okay. So let's do it. Okay. Let's assume that what will happen in this graph if we produce somewhere to the right Q1. Okay. Let's call this Q1 plus 1. Okay. Okay. So you can see that, okay, follow the same logic, right? The cost is under the supply curve. The benefit is under the demand curve. So you can see that by produce one additional unit of good, marginal cost of this good is actually higher than the marginal benefit. Okay, so the marginal cost is from this up to the supply curve. So like the red line, the marginal benefit is the green. Okay, so you can see that there's a gap. Okay, so this is a gap. The gap is this, right? Between difference between red and green. So that is the negative benefit because the cost of producing this good is higher than the benefit you get. So if you would like to maximize the total benefit of the society, you will not do this because let's say that now, okay, let's say that now the total benefit is well, the difference between total benefit and total cost is that the surplus, right? But if we choose to produce more, right, the last unit Q1 plus 1 now have higher cost than the benefit. So it means that the total benefit is actually reduced because the last unit have higher cost than the benefit you get. So it actually have a negative total benefit. So when you add it to the existing total benefit, it means it can be less. Okay? So let's say like the total benefit is 100, right? But the last unit you produce, it actually have a negative benefit because cost is higher than the benefit. So let's say like -1. So now you ended up with 99. So why produce more than Q1, more than equilibrium, you actually have less total benefit. So that's why in the book, it says that you actually maximize the welfare or maximize the, I think the word they use is efficiency, right? Okay, you said that the sum of the consumers of, okay, that is true. Okay, the market achieve the efficiency. Yeah, social welfare is maximized. It used, but why maximize? Because now the total benefit is the net benefit is the highest. Because if you produce one more unit, actually the marginal benefit is lower than the marginal cost. So with that, you're going to have a negative total benefit, and adding to the existing total benefit, you're going to have less, like I showed you just now, right? 100 minus 1 is 99. So you're not maximizing welfare then. So that's why you have to start at Q1 at the equilibrium. So you can see that now we use the same model, demand and supply, but we use it to explain a related concepts of welfare, right? How this, right? The price, we arrive at the equilibrium using the price mechanisms. And when we look at the welfare from the perspective of welfare, we can see that we arrive at the maximized welfare at the same point. So it means that the price mechanism, if you're using it, it's going to lead to the maximum of the social welfare according to this simple model of demand and supply. Okay, that is all I want to say in this clip. I hope it helped you understanding the content, because I think the book explained too little. Its explanation is correct, but probably too little to understand on your own. Okay, thank you.